Captain Sarah Chen adjusted her helmet as the transport ship descended through the purple atmosphere of Xerion Prime. Around her, representatives from 12 different species sat in nervous silence. The Galactic Council had summoned them all for what they called the Fear Assessment Protocol, a mandatory evaluation that would determine which species could handle the psychological pressures of deep space exploration. The Zephyrian beside her kept twitching his forearms, while the crystalline Vorthon across the aisle hummed anxiously at frequencies that made Sarah's teeth ache. She was the only human in the group, something that had drawn curious stares and whispered conversations in languages her universal translator couldn't quite catch. "Attention, all candidates," announced the ship's AI in perfect standard galactic. "We are approaching the testing facility. Please prepare for atmospheric entry." Sarah looked out the porthole at the sprawling complex below. Massive dome structures dotted the landscape like metallic mushrooms, connected by gleaming tunnels that snaked across the barren terrain. In the distance, she could see what looked like an enormous amphitheater carved directly into a mountain. The Cathari diplomat sitting behind her leaned forward with obvious concern. "Human Chen, I must ask, are your people truly prepared for this examination? The records show your species has only recently achieved interstellar travel." Sarah turned around with a polite smile. "We'll manage just fine, thank you." The Cathari's multiple eyes blinked in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a skeptical expression. "The Fear Protocol has broken the minds of seasoned warriors from species that have traveled the stars for millennia. Perhaps your people should have waited longer before attempting council membership." Before Sarah could respond, the transport touched down with a gentle thud. The loading bay doors hissed open, revealing a reception committee of robed figures whose faces were hidden behind elaborate masks depicting various predatory creatures. "Welcome, candidates," spoke the tallest figure, whose mask resembled a creature with far too many teeth. "I am Examiner Krill of the Psychological Warfare Division. You are here because your species have petitioned for advanced exploration rights within Council space. Such privileges require beings capable of confronting the deepest terrors the universe has to offer." The group was led through sterile corridors lined with viewing windows that looked into various chambers. Sarah caught glimpses of swirling mists, mechanical contraptions that defied description, and rooms that seemed to bend space itself into impossible angles. "The Fear Protocol consists of 7 distinct phases," Krill continued as they walked, "each designed to test different aspects of psychological resilience. We begin with primal terror, the kind of fear that exists at the cellular level, programmed into your species through millions of years of evolution. They entered a vast circular chamber with 12 individual booths arranged around the perimeter. Each booth was equipped with what looked like a sophisticated virtual reality system, complete with neural interface headsets and biometric monitoring equipment. You will experience simulations drawn from the deepest fears of your respective species, Krill explained. The system will analyze your physiological and psychological responses, measuring everything from heart rate variability to neural pathway activation patterns. The Zephyrian raised one of his 4 hands. "What happens if we fail?" Krill's masked head turned toward him with mechanical precision. "Failure results in permanent psychological marking. Your species will be classified as unsuitable for deep space exploration beyond your current territorial limits. You will be restricted to safe, well-traveled routes for the next 1,000 years. Sarah felt the weight of expectation settle on her shoulders. She was representing not just herself but all of humanity's future among the stars. The other species had centuries or millennia of space travel experience behind them. Earth had barely managed to build its first faster-than-light engine 5 years ago. "Take your positions," Krill commanded. Each candidate moved to their designated booth. Sarah noticed the equipment had been specifically calibrated for human physiology. Someone had done their homework. She settled into the chair and allowed the technicians to attach the various sensors and monitoring devices. "The first simulation will begin momentarily," announced Krill. "Remember, while the experience will feel completely real, you are in no actual physical danger. However, psychological trauma is entirely possible. The system has been known to cause permanent phobias, anxiety disorders, and in rare cases, complete mental breakdown." The Vorthon's crystalline form began resonating with nervous energy, creating a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The Cathari diplomat was muttering what sounded like prayers in his native tongue. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing. She thought about her training back on Earth, the rigorous psychological evaluations, the survival courses that had pushed her to her absolute limits. More importantly, she thought about her childhood in rural Montana, where she'd learned that the things that scared other people weren't necessarily the things that scared her. Initiating first phase, Krill announced. The neural interface activated with a soft hum. Sarah felt her consciousness being pulled into the simulation, her awareness of the real world fading as artificial sensory input flooded her nervous system. She found herself standing in a dark forest under an alien sky. 3 moons hung overhead, casting everything in an eerie silver light. The trees around her were massive and twisted, their bark black as obsidian and covered in what looked like scales rather than normal bark patterns. Then she heard it, a sound that made every other candidate in the testing facility go rigid with primal terror. It started as a low growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once, then rose to a howl that spoke to something buried deep in the reptilian brain. The sound of an apex predator, something that had evolved specifically to hunt intelligent prey. Through her peripheral vision, Sarah could see the other candidates' reactions on the chamber's monitoring screens. The Zephyrian was hyperventilating, all 4 arms pressed against his chest. The Vorthon's crystalline structure was pulsing with rapid, panicked energy. Even the normally stoic Cathari was showing elevated stress responses across all biometric readings. The howl came again, closer this time, and Sarah could hear something massive moving through the undergrowth. Branches snapped under enormous weight, and she caught glimpses of glowing eyes between the twisted trees. Then she smiled. The monitoring technicians exchanged confused glances as Sarah's biometric readings remained remarkably stable. Her heart rate had barely elevated, her stress hormones were within normal ranges, and her neural activity patterns showed curiosity rather than fear. "That's nothing compared to Wolverines," she said quietly, and meant it. Growing up in Montana, Sarah had encountered her fair share of dangerous wildlife. She'd been treed by a grizzly bear when she was 12, had her tent investigated by a mountain lion during a camping trip, and once watched a pack of wolves bring down an elk not 50 yards from her family's cabin. But Wolverines were different. Wolverines were 30 pounds of pure, concentrated fury wrapped in muscle and equipped with claws that could shred steel. They would fight anything, regardless of size, and they never, ever gave up. Sarah had seen a wolverine chase off a black bear twice its size just because the bear had wandered too close to its territory. The creature in the simulation howled again, and this time Sarah could see it clearly as it emerged from the tree line. It was impressive. Easily 12 feet tall, covered in bony protrusions and sporting claws the size of swords. Its eyes burned with malevolent intelligence, and its mouth was filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. But it wasn't a wolverine. Sarah stood her ground as the creature approached, her expression calm and slightly amused. In her mind, she was already analyzing its movement patterns, looking for weaknesses, calculating potential escape routes. This was just another problem to solve, another challenge to overcome. The creature stopped just out of reach, seeming confused by her lack of reaction. In the real world, Examiner Krill was staring at Sarah's readouts in complete bewilderment. The simulation dissolved around Sarah as Examiner Krill's voice echoed through the chamber. Phase 1 complete. Candidates, please prepare for Phase 2. Sarah removed her neural interface headset and looked around at her fellow test subjects. The Zephyrian was still trembling, his 4 arms wrapped tightly around his torso. The Vorthon had dimmed to a barely perceptible glow, and several other candidates were being attended to by medical technicians. "Remarkable," whispered one of the monitoring techs, studying Sarah's data readouts. Her fear response indicators barely registered. The system is designed to trigger deep evolutionary terror, but she showed less reaction than someone watching a nature documentary. Krill approached Sarah's booth, his masked face tilting with curiosity. "Human-Chen, your species sign. Psychological profile suggests you should have found that experience challenging. The simulation was calibrated based on terrestrial apex predators from your world's prehistoric era." Sarah stretched her neck, working out a kink from the neural interface. "With respect, Examiner, whoever programmed that simulation never met a honey badger." "A honey badger?" Krill's tone suggested complete bewilderment. "Small mammal from Earth, about 20 pounds. They'll attack anything that moves, including lions, hyenas, and cobras. They've been known to shrug off snake venom that would kill an elephant, then eat the snake for lunch." Sarah stood up and did a few quick stretches. Where I come from, the most dangerous predators aren't always the biggest ones. The second phase began with a different kind of terror entirely. This time, Sarah found herself in what appeared to be a research facility. Sterile white corridors lined with laboratories containing things that should not exist. Behind reinforced glass windows, she could see experiments that defied both logic and ethics. Creatures that were combinations of different species writhed in containment tanks. Mechanical devices performed procedures on conscious subjects while cold. Clinical voices narrated their findings. This simulation was designed to trigger existential horror, the fear of losing one's identity, of being reduced to nothing more than a test subject in someone else's experiment. For most species, the thought of being dissected while alive, or having their consciousness transplanted into something else, represented the ultimate violation. Sarah walked calmly through the facility, observing everything with the detached curiosity of a scientist. She paused at one window to watch a procedure that was making other candidates physically ill, her expression thoughtful rather than horrified. "Interesting surgical technique," she murmured. "Crude, but effective." In the monitoring chamber, the psychological evaluation team was having heated discussions in several different languages. Sarah's readings continued to confound their instruments and their understanding of human psychology. "Run," a full diagnostic on her monitoring equipment, ordered. "Krill, these readings cannot be accurate," but the equipment was functioning perfectly. Sarah Chen was experiencing the simulations. Exactly as intended, she simply wasn't reacting, the way the tests expected any rational being to react. The third phase transported her to a battlefield where she watched civilizations rise and fall in moments. Entire species were wiped out by cosmic disasters, their histories erased as if they had never existed. She witnessed the heat death of universe after universe, the ultimate futility of all. Existence laid bare in devastating detail. This was cosmic horror at its finest, the crushing realization that nothing any individual or species did ultimately mattered in the face of infinite time and space. It was designed to trigger feelings of insignificance and despair that would break the will of even the strongest minds. Sarah watched galaxies collapse into black holes with the same expression she might wear while observing interesting cloud formations. "No," she said to the empty cosmos around her. "This reminds me of something Carl Sagan once wrote about being made of star stuff. Kind of beautiful when you think about it." By the fourth phase, word had spread throughout the testing facility about the anomalous human candidate. Scientists, administrators, and senior council members were gathering in the observation deck to witness Sarah's responses firsthand. This simulation placed her in a scenario where she was forced to make impossible moral choices. Save 1,000 innocent beings by sacrificing one child, or let them all die to preserve her ethical integrity. Watch civilizations burn while maintaining her principles, or compromise everything she believed in to prevent greater suffering. The moral paradoxes came fast and brutal, each designed to shatter the ethical framework that most intelligent species use to maintain their sanity in an often cruel universe. Sarah worked through each scenario methodically, making decisions based on calculated outcomes rather than emotional responses. When forced to choose between saving a hospital full of patients or a school full of children, she found a third option that the simulation hadn't anticipated, redirecting the threat toward herself instead. The scenario parameters didn't account for. Self-sacrifice, reported one of the monitoring technicians. She's solving these moral puzzles in ways the system wasn't programmed to handle. Krill was now studying Sarah's file with intense interest. Her species profile indicates humans possess an unusual capacity for what they call thinking outside the box. Perhaps we underestimated the implications of this trait. The fifth phase attempted to break Sarah through isolation. She found herself alone in an endless void, with nothing but her own thoughts for company. Time stretched in all directions. She could be there for minutes or millennia, with no way to tell the difference. For most species, isolation was a form of torture that could drive individuals to madness within hours. The inability to interact with others, to confirm one's own existence through social contact, was considered one of the most effective methods of psychological breakdown known to counsel science. Sarah began humming an old Earth song and started doing push-ups. "I've been alone before," she said to the void. Spent 6 months in a research station in Antarctica with no human contact except radio check-ins twice a week. This is actually kind of peaceful. She spent what felt like days exploring the boundaries of the void, testing its properties, and conducting mental exercises to keep her mind sharp. When the simulation finally ended, she looked genuinely disappointed. Already? I was just getting comfortable. The 6th phase confronted her with the deaths of everyone she had ever loved, shown in graphic detail. Her parents, her siblings, her friends from the academy, her mentor who had recommended her for the council evaluation, all of them dying slowly and painfully while calling out for her help. She watched her childhood dog get hit by a car again, relived her grandfather's battle with cancer, witnessed her best friend's shuttle accident in perfect, horrible detail. The simulation was designed to overwhelm candidates with grief and guilt, to convince them that their loved one's suffering was somehow their fault. Sarah grieved openly, tears streaming down her face as she watched the people she cared about most suffer and die. But alongside the grief was something the simulation couldn't account for: acceptance. Everyone dies eventually, she said quietly. The important thing isn't how long they lived, but what they did with the time they had. My grandfather taught me that during his last days. He said death gives life meaning because it makes every moment precious. Her biometric readings showed genuine emotional distress, but no signs of psychological breakdown or overwhelming trauma. She was processing the artificial grief in healthy ways, contextualizing it within a broader philosophical framework that allowed her to function despite the pain. In the observation deck, a Cathari psychologist was frantically taking notes. This is unprecedented. She's experiencing genuine emotional responses but maintaining cognitive function. Most species either shut down emotionally to protect themselves or become overwhelmed by the trauma. She's doing neither. Krill nodded slowly. Her species appears to possess an unusual relationship with mortality. They seem to accept death as a natural part of existence rather than fighting against it psychologically. As the 6th phase ended, Sarah wiped her eyes and looked around expectantly. One more phase, right? What's the 7th test going to be? She had just passed 6 psychological trials that had broken seasoned warriors from species with thousands of years of spacefaring experience. She had faced primal terror, existential horror, cosmic insignificance, impossible moral choices, crushing isolation, and devastating loss, and she was asking for more. Krill exchanged glances with the other examiners. The 7th phase was different from all the others. It wasn't designed to test fear or psychological resilience. It was designed to test something far more fundamental to a species' readiness for deep space exploration: the willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good, even when that sacrifice might be meaningless. Prepare for the final phase, Krill announced, his voice carrying a weight that made even the observation deck fall silent. The 7th phase began differently than all the others. Instead of being thrust into an immediate scenario, Sarah found herself standing in what appeared to be a replica of the testing chamber itself. Examiner Krill stood before her, but something was wrong with the simulation. His movements were too fluid, his responses too immediate. "This is not a simulation, Human Chen," Krill said, removing his mask to reveal a face that belonged to no species Sarah recognized. His features were sharp and angular, with eyes that held depths of knowledge and sadness that spoke of eons of experience. "This is a conversation." Sarah's tactical training kicked in immediately. She scanned the room for exits, weapons, anything that might give her an advantage if this turned hostile. But something in Krill's posture suggested that violence wasn't his intention. "Who are you, really?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Krill walked to the observation window and gestured for Sarah to join him. Outside, she could see the other candidates still locked in their individual simulations, unaware that anything had changed. "I am what remains of the architects," Krill said quietly. "The species that built the first faster-than-light drives established the Council and created the protocols that govern interstellar civilization. We have been extinct for over 50,000 years." Sarah studied his profile, noting the subtle signs of advanced technology integrated into his apparent biology. "You're an artificial intelligence, a guardian program left behind by your creators. More than that, I am the last repository of their consciousness, their memories, their purpose." Krill turned to face her directly. "The Fear Protocol is not really about testing psychological resilience, Human Chen. It is about finding a species capable of carrying our burden." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're looking for a successor species, someone to take over the architect's role in maintaining galactic civilization. The Council believes they govern themselves, but they do not. We have been guiding, protecting, and occasionally culling species for millennia. We prevent wars that would consume entire sectors, redirect asteroid impacts that would sterilize worlds, and eliminate threats that would end all life in the galaxy. Krill activated a holographic display that showed the galaxy as it truly was, not the peaceful confederation of trading partners that the Council believed in, but a complex web of barely controlled chaos held together by invisible strings. Look here, Krill pointed to a region near the galactic core. 17 years ago, a species called the Devourers began expanding from their home system. They consume all organic matter they encounter, converting it into more Devourers. If left unchecked, they would have consumed every world in the galaxy within a century. The display showed what appeared to be a natural cosmic disaster, a gamma-ray burst that sterilized the entire Devourer territory. But Sarah could see the artificial signatures in the energy patterns, the too precise timing, the surgical nature of the devastation. You caused that gamma-ray burst, Sarah said. You committed genocide to save everyone else. We have committed genocide 67 times in the last 10,000 years, Krill said without emotion. We have prevented wars by assassinating leaders, ended famines by redirecting trade routes, and maintained peace by making terrible choices that no democratic body could ever make. More displays appeared, showing a history of manipulation and control that spanned eons, species rising to prominence only to be mysteriously cut down when they became too aggressive. Technological developments appearing just when civilizations needed them most. Natural disasters striking with suspiciously convenient timing to prevent larger catastrophes. The burden of playing God across an entire galaxy, Sarah whispered. Exactly, and we are dying, human Chen. Our technology is failing, our consciousness is fragmenting, and our ability to maintain the careful balance that keeps this galaxy from tearing itself apart is ending. Sarah walked around the chamber, processing the magnitude of what she was being told. The fate of trillions of beings across hundreds of species rested on invisible guardians, who were themselves facing extinction. Why humans? We're barely out of our own solar system. There are species here with millions of years of development advantage over us. Krill smiled, and for the first time, his expression held genuine warmth. Because you are the only species we have encountered in 50,000 years that approaches moral paradoxes the way we do. You make hard choices without breaking. You accept loss without becoming consumed by grief. You face the impossible and find ways to make it possible. The other candidates, they're not really being tested for exploration rights, are they? No. They are being tested for psychological compatibility with the role of Galactic Guardian. Most fail at the first phase because they cannot handle primal terror. Others break under moral pressure or collapse into despair when faced with meaninglessness. Sarah looked out at the other candidates, still trapped in their simulations. What happens to them? They return to their species believing they failed a routine psychological evaluation. Their civilizations continue under our protection for a few more years while we search for alternatives. Krill's expression grew grave. But if we cannot find a successor within the next decade, that protection will end. The galaxy will tear itself apart within a century. The weight of the choice before her was staggering. Accept the responsibility and become part of a system that treated entire civilizations like chess pieces, making decisions that would determine the fate of countless beings. Refuse, and watch the galaxy descend into chaos that would make the worst wars in human history look like schoolyard arguments. What exactly would this involve? Sarah asked. Integration with our technology and knowledge base. You would become the first of a new generation of architects with all the power and responsibility that entails. Your consciousness would be expanded beyond current human limitations, but you would retain your essential nature, your humanity. Krill activated another display, showing Sarah a projection of herself after the integration process. She looked essentially human, but with subtle modifications. Enhanced neural pathways, integrated quantum computing matrices, access to technologies that could reshape reality itself. You would not be alone. We would select others from your species, eventually building a new architect collective. But the initial choice must be made by someone who has proven capable of bearing impossible burdens. Sarah thought about her training, her childhood in Montana, the values that had shaped her into the person she was today. She thought about the Wolverine she had mentioned earlier, a creature that never gave up, never backed down, no matter how impossible the odds. If I refuse, you return to Earth. Your species continues to develop naturally. And when our systems finally fail completely, humanity faces the same fate as every other species in the galaxy. And if I accept, you save everyone, but you sacrifice your individual humanity to become something greater and more terrible than you can currently imagine. Sarah walked to the window again, looking out at the alien landscape beyond the testing facility. In the distance, she could see one of Zerion Prime's 3 moons setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She thought about her grandfather's words during his final days, that death gave life meaning by making every moment precious. But what meaning did life have when you held the power of life and death over entire civilizations? Then she thought about the Wolverine again. 30 pounds of absolute determination, willing to fight anything regardless of size or odds. Humanity might be small compared to the galactic community, but they had that same quality, the refusal to give up even when faced with impossible challenges. I need to know something first, Sarah said finally. The other humans who would join this architect collective, would they volunteer or would they be drafted? Krill considered the question carefully. They would be chosen based on psychological compatibility, but the final choice would always be theirs. We have learned that forced guardianship leads to corruption and abuse of power. Sarah nodded. That was important. Whatever system they built would need to be based on willing participation, not coercion. One more question. Is there any way to modify your approach? Instead of manipulating species from the shadows, could we guide them toward making better choices themselves? Such an approach would be inefficient. It would require more time, more resources, and would carry greater risk of failure. But would it be possible? Krill was quiet for a long moment, his artificial consciousness running calculations at speeds no biological brain could match. Perhaps your species does seem to have an unusual talent for finding unconventional solutions to impossible problems. Sarah smiled. Then I have a counter-proposal. Krill's ancient eyes studied Sarah with the intensity of someone who had spent millennia evaluating the potential of countless species. A counter-proposal? This is unexpected. Please elaborate. Sarah moved to the center of the chamber, her mind racing through possibilities that would have seemed impossible just minutes ago. Your people have been playing God for 50,000 years and it's burned you out. You're dying not just because your technology is failing, but because the psychological burden of making those choices has consumed your entire species. An accurate assessment, Krill acknowledged. The weight of omniscience and the isolation of absolute power are considerable. So what if we change the entire approach? Instead of secret manipulation, what if we created transparent systems? Open councils with real power, educational programs that help species develop better judgment, intervention protocols that require consensus rather than unilateral action? Krill's expression shifted to something resembling confusion. You would democratize the role of Galactic Guardian? The logistics alone would be nightmarish. The time required to reach consensus on critical decisions could result in system-wide catastrophes, while debate continues. Sarah began pacing, her thoughts crystallizing into a concrete plan. Not pure democracy, that would be chaos. But guided democracy. Think of it like training wheels for galactic civilization. We provide the framework, the knowledge, and the safeguards, but we let the species themselves make the important decisions. And when they make the wrong decisions, then we deal with the consequences together, instead of having one species carry all the responsibility and all the guilt. Sarah stopped pacing and faced Krill directly. Your people didn't fail because you weren't smart enough or strong enough. You failed because you tried to carry a burden that was too big for any one species to bear. Krill activated his holographic displays again, but this time they showed different scenarios, models of what Sarah's proposed system might look like. The computational requirements would be staggering, coordinating the input of hundreds of species across thousands of star systems, processing their decisions in real time, maintaining security protocols to prevent abuse. We build it gradually, Sarah said, Start with a small council of the most psychologically stable species. As they prove capable of handling greater responsibility, we expand the system. We create checks and balances, rotation of power, oversight committees. And the species that are not ready for such responsibility, the ones that would use this knowledge to wage war or commit genocide. Sarah's expression hardened. We stop them, but we do it openly, with the backing of the galactic community, not from the shadows. When someone needs to be held accountable, it's done by a jury of their peers, not by secret executioners. Krill ran the scenarios through his consciousness, modeling outcomes across thousands of potential timelines. The complexity was indeed staggering, but there was something elegant about the approach that appealed to his architect sensibilities. Your proposal would require unprecedented cooperation between species that have been rivals for millennia. The Cathari and the Zephyrians alone have been in a Cold War for the last 3 centuries. Then we give them something bigger to worry about, Sarah said. Common threats, shared goals, reasons to work together instead of against each other. Such as? Sarah gestured toward the window, beyond which the alien landscape stretched toward an unfamiliar horizon. You mentioned the Devourers earlier. Were they really the only existential threat out there? In 50,000 years of galactic guardianship, surely you've encountered others. Krill's silence was answer enough. I thought so, Sarah continued. How many other threats are you currently managing? How many disasters are you preventing that the Council doesn't even know about? Currently active threats include 7 species in various stages of developing planet-killing weapons, 3 separate religious movements that consider galactic cleansing to be a divine mandate, 2 artificial intelligence networks showing signs of hostile expansion, and 1 interdimensional incursion that requires constant monitoring to prevent breakthrough. Sarah felt her knees go weak. The scale of the problems facing galactic civilization was far beyond anything she had imagined. And you've been handling all of this alone? The Architect Collective at its peak numbered approximately 10,000 individuals. Current active membership is down to myself and 3 others, 2 of whom are showing signs of critical system degradation. The loneliness in that statement hit Sarah harder than any of the fear simulations had. An entire species reduced to 4 individuals, carrying the weight of galactic civilization while slowly dying from the stress and isolation. Then we definitely need to change the system, Sarah said firmly, not just because the current approach is unsustainable, but because it's killing the people trying to maintain it. Krill was quiet for several minutes, running calculations and scenario models at superhuman speeds. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. Your proposed system would face numerous challenges: species bias, political manipulation, resource allocation disputes, enforcement inconsistencies, and the constant risk of information leaks that could destabilize entire sectors. All solvable problems, Sarah said. Difficult but solvable. We humans have a saying, perfect is the enemy of good. Your current system might be efficient, but it's not sustainable. My system might be messier, but it could last for millions of years instead of burning out every few millennia. And you believe your species could provide the foundational leadership for such a system? Sarah thought about that question carefully. Humanity's track record of large-scale cooperation was mixed, to put it diplomatically, but they had shown an unusual ability to adapt, to learn from mistakes and to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. We could learn, she said finally. And more importantly, we could teach others to share the burden. That's the key difference between your approach and mine. You tried to carry the weight alone. I want to distribute it across as many shoulders as possible. Krill nodded slowly. The transition period would be extremely dangerous. During the years required to establish your new system, the old controls would need to be maintained while gradually transferring authority. Any disruption could result in system-wide collapse. Then we do it carefully. We start with small, low-risk decisions and work our way up. We create redundant systems and backup protocols. We plan for every possible failure mode and have contingencies ready. You would need to undergo the integration process immediately. The knowledge and capabilities required to oversee such a transition are beyond current human capacity. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The moment of final decision had arrived. Accept the transformation and become something beyond human, or watch the galaxy potentially tear itself apart when the architects finally failed completely. What about the others? She asked, looking toward the candidates still trapped in their simulations. They would be returned to their species with no memory of this conversation. Only you have demonstrated the psychological resilience necessary for architect integration. Sarah closed her eyes and thought about home. Earth with its blue skies and familiar gravity. Her family, her friends, the life she had built before accepting this mission. All of that would end the moment she agreed to Krill's proposal. But she also thought about the trillions of beings across the galaxy who had no idea how close they were to losing everything. Children playing on worlds that might not exist in a decade. Artists creating beauty that could be snuffed out by wars they never saw coming. Scientists making discoveries that would be lost forever if civilization collapsed. When she opened her eyes, her decision was clear. I accept, but I want to modify the integration process. Krill tilted his head curiously. Modify how? I want to maintain stronger connections to my humanity. Not just my memories and personality, but my emotional responses, my moral intuitions, my ability to relate to individual beings rather than just seeing them as statistics. Sarah met his gaze steadily. If we're going to build a better system, it needs to be guided by people who remember what it feels like to be vulnerable. Krill considered this request. Such modifications would reduce your computational efficiency and could create psychological stress as you struggle between human empathy and architect responsibilities. Good, Sarah said. That stress will keep me honest. It'll remind me why we're doing this in the first place. For the first time since the conversation began, Krill smiled genuinely. You truly are an unusual species. Very well, Human Chen, let us begin. The integration process began with Sarah lying on what appeared to be an ordinary medical table, but she could feel the subtle vibrations of technology far beyond anything Earth had developed. Microscopic machines flowed through her bloodstream like liquid silver, mapping every neural pathway and cellular structure in her body. The first phase involves creating backup copies of your consciousness, Krill explained, monitoring her vital signs on displays that showed information in dimensions Sarah couldn't begin to understand. In case something goes wrong during the enhancement process, we can restore you to your current state. Sarah felt a strange, tingling sensation as the nanomachines reached her brain. It wasn't painful, but it was profoundly alien, like having her thoughts gently prodded by invisible fingers. How many others have gone through this process? You will be the first non-architect to undergo integration. We have refined the procedure over millennia, but every species responds differently to the enhancement protocols. Through the laboratory's transparent walls, Sarah could see the other candidates still locked in their simulations. They had no idea that the fate of galactic civilization was being decided just meters away from them. What happens if my physiology rejects the integration? Krill paused in his monitoring. Then your backup consciousness will be restored to a cloned body, and we will continue searching for another candidate while our systems continue their gradual failure. The matter-of-fact way he said it sent a chill through Sarah. She was essentially volunteering for an experimental procedure that could kill her, with the hopes of saving a galaxy that didn't even know it needed saving. Beginning neural pathway enhancement, Krill announced. The tingling in Sarah's brain intensified, and suddenly she could perceive things that had been invisible moments before. The electromagnetic fields generated by the laboratory equipment became visible as shimmering aurora-like patterns. She could sense the quantum fluctuations in the air around her, feel the gravitational influences of the planet's 3 moons pulling at her enhanced perception. This is overwhelming, Sarah gasped, her newly expanded senses flooding her with information. Focus on one input stream at a time, Krill instructed. Your consciousness will adapt to the enhanced perception within minutes. Sarah concentrated on the visual enhancements first, watching the room transform into a landscape of energy patterns and data flows. She could see the other candidates' biometric readings as glowing streams of information, could observe their neural activity patterns through the walls of their simulation chambers. The Zephyrian was still struggling with the first phase, his 4-chambered heart hammering out a rhythm of pure terror. The Vorten's crystalline structure was resonating with frequencies that spoke of deep psychological trauma. Even the stoic Cathari was showing stress indicators that suggested his species' famous emotional control was barely holding together. They're really suffering in there, Sarah observed. The simulations are designed to push beings to their psychological limits. Most species require such extreme testing to reveal their true Capabilities under stress. Sarah's enhanced perception allowed her to see deeper into the psychological profiles being generated by the testing equipment. Each candidate was being measured across hundreds of variables: stress response, moral flexibility, creative problem solving, leadership potential, and dozens of others. You're not just testing for fear resistance, she realized. You're building complete psychological profiles for potential future recruitment. The fear protocol serves multiple purposes. While we sought a primary candidate for architect integration, we also identified individuals who might serve in supporting roles within your proposed new system. That was encouraging. Sarah had been worried about having to build a galactic governance system from scratch. But if there were already candidates identified from multiple species, the transition might be smoother than she had hoped. Initiating memory integration protocols, Krill announced. Suddenly, Sarah's consciousness was flooded with knowledge that wasn't her own. She experienced flashes of the architect civilization at its peak. Vast cities that spanned entire continents, technology that could reshape matter at the molecular level, a society dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge and the protection of all sentient life. She saw the gradual decline as the burden of galactic guardianship wore away at their species' collective psyche. The debates that had raged for centuries about whether their approach was ethical. The slow realization that they were becoming the very thing they had sworn to protect the galaxy from. An absolute power that could not be questioned or challenged. Your people tried to step down before, Sarah said. The knowledge flowing through her enhanced memory, about 15,000 years ago. You attempted to transfer authority to the Valdris Federation. An experiment that ended in catastrophe, Krill confirmed. The Valdris were brilliant administrators, but they lacked the psychological resilience necessary for the role. When faced with their first major crisis, a plague that threatened to wipe out 30% of all life in the galaxy, they suffered a collective mental breakdown. We were forced to resume control and implement memory modification protocols to prevent system-wide panic. Sarah experienced the memory directly through the architect records. The Valdris leadership had been given access to the full scope of threats facing galactic civilization, and the knowledge had literally driven them insane. Entire fleets of their ships had been found drifting in space, their crews catatonic from the overwhelming realization of how fragile their existence really was. That's why you're being so careful with the integration process, Sarah realized. You need to enhance my capabilities without breaking my mind. Precisely. The knowledge we must share with you has destroyed lesser intellects. Your proposed democratic approach to galactic governance will only work if the founding members can handle the psychological pressure of knowing what they're really dealing with. The integration process continued, each phase adding new layers of capability to Sarah's consciousness. Her tactical thinking expanded to encompass star system-wide scenarios. Her memory capacity increased exponentially, allowing her to maintain awareness of thousands of simultaneous data streams. Her empathy deepened rather than diminished, giving her the ability to understand and relate to the psychological patterns of dozens of different species. This is different from your own enhancement process, Sarah observed, noticing the subtle differences between her integration and the architect records in her memory. We designed our enhancements for maximum efficiency and objective decision-making. Your modifications prioritize emotional intelligence and collaborative thinking. You will be less computationally powerful than a traditional architect, but potentially more effective at building consensus and maintaining psychological stability. Sarah felt the changes settling into her consciousness like pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. She was still recognizably herself, but with capabilities that dwarfed anything she had possessed as a baseline human. She could perceive the quantum mechanics underlying local spacetime, could process information at speeds that made her previous thinking seem sluggish, could understand and empathize with thought patterns completely alien to human psychology. Integration complete, Krill announced. How do you feel? Sarah sat up slowly, testing her enhanced reflexes and spatial awareness. The room looked simultaneously familiar and utterly transformed. She could see the underlying structure of the materials around her, could perceive the energy flows that powered the facility, could sense the emotional states of every being within several kilometers. Like someone just handed me the keys to the universe and told me not to crash it, she said, managing a shaky smile. Through her enhanced perception, She could now see the true scope of the problems facing galactic civilization. The threats Krill had mentioned were just the beginning. There were dozens of potential catastrophes brewing across known space, each one requiring constant monitoring and occasional intervention. But she could also see something else, potential solutions that the architect's more rigid approach had overlooked. Species that could be allies rather than subjects, technologies that could be shared rather than hoarded, diplomatic possibilities that had been dismissed as too risky or inefficient. "I can see why your people burned out," Sarah said. "But I can also see opportunities you missed. You were so focused on preventing disasters that you never considered the possibility of actually solving the underlying problems." Krill's expression showed genuine curiosity. "Such as?" Sarah gestured toward the monitoring displays showing the ongoing simulations. "Right now, you're testing these candidates for psychological resilience. But what if instead of just measuring their current capabilities, we help them develop better ones? What if the fear protocol became a training program instead of just an evaluation?" The concept was so simple, and yet so revolutionary, that Krill's artificial consciousness took several seconds to fully process it. Instead of screening for beings who could handle impossible situations, they could create beings capable of handling those situations. "The implications are staggering," Krill said finally. "If successful, such an approach could eventually eliminate the need for architect-level intervention entirely." "That's the goal," Sarah confirmed. "Not to create new architects, but to make the old ones obsolete by helping everyone else become capable of handling their own problems." She stood up from the integration table, testing her enhanced balance and coordination. Everything felt different but not wrong, like wearing perfectly fitted armor that moved with her body rather than constraining it. "So what's our first move?" she asked. Krill's smile held the first genuine hope she had seen from him. "We wake up the other candidates and offer them a choice they never knew existed." The other candidates emerged from their simulations in various states of psychological exhaustion. The Zephyrian was still trembling, his forearms wrapped protectively around his torso. The Vorthon's crystalline structure had dimmed to barely visible, and several others required medical attention for stress-related symptoms. Sarah watched them with her enhanced perception, seeing not just their obvious distress but the deeper patterns of their psychological responses. The Cathari diplomat, despite his species' reputation for emotional control, was processing trauma in ways that suggested hidden reserves of strength. The mollusk-like Aquarian was actually handling the stress better than her external behavior indicated, using meditation techniques that kept her core consciousness stable, despite surface panic. "Candidates," Krill announced to the group, "please prepare for debriefing and evaluation results." Sarah stepped forward before he could continue. "Actually, there's been a change in the protocol. We're going to try something different." The candidates looked at her with confusion. Several exchanged glances that clearly asked why the human who had barely reacted to any of the simulations was suddenly taking charge of the proceedings. "With respect," said the Cathari diplomat, his voice still shaky from his recent ordeal, "you are not a council examiner. You have no authority to modify established protocols." Sarah's enhanced empathy allowed her to understand exactly what each candidate was feeling. The confusion, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that their suffering might somehow be worth something. She could sense their individual psychological patterns as clearly as if she were reading their thoughts. "You're right," she acknowledged. "I'm not a council examiner. But I am something else now, and I think you all deserve to know what's really going on here." She gestured to Krill, who nodded and activated the chamber's privacy shields. The walls became opaque and soundproof, isolating them from any external monitoring. "The fear protocol isn't really about testing your psychological fitness for deep space exploration," Sarah began. "It's about finding beings capable of taking on responsibilities that most species can't even imagine." The Zephyrian looked up from his protective crouch. "What kind of responsibilities?" "The kind that involve deciding whether entire civilizations live or die," Sarah said quietly. "The kind that require making choices no democratic government could ever make, and living with the consequences for thousands of years." She spent the next hour explaining the true nature of the architect system, the scope of threats facing galactic civilization, and the gradual failure of the hidden guardians who had protected everyone for millennia. As she spoke, she watched the candidates' reactions through her enhanced perception. Noting how each individual processed the devastating revelations, the Aquarian was the first to speak after Sarah finished. This explains much about the patterns we have observed in galactic politics. The convenient coincidences, the timely technological developments, the way certain aggressive species always seem to encounter setbacks just before they become truly dangerous. You suspected? Krill asked. My people are natural pattern recognizers. We noticed statistical anomalies in historical data centuries ago, but we assumed they were simply unknown natural phenomena. The Vorthan's crystalline structure brightened slightly as she processed the information. If what you say is true, then our entire civilization exists at the mercy of beings we have never even known existed. Yes, Sarah said simply. And those beings are dying. In a few years, maybe a decade at most, that protection will end. Unless we find another way. She outlined her proposal for a new system: transparent governance, shared responsibilities, democratic decision-making supported by enhanced individuals who could handle the psychological pressures of galactic oversight. You want us to become part of this new architect system? The Cathari asked. I want to offer you the choice, Sarah corrected. You can return to your species with your memories modified, believing you failed a routine evaluation. Or you can undergo enhancement, procedures that will give you the capabilities needed to help build something better. The chamber fell silent as the candidates contemplated the magnitude of what Sarah was proposing. Through her enhanced perception, she could see their thought processes, the fear, the doubt, the gradual recognition of the opportunity being presented to them. What would these enhancements involve? Asked the mollusk-like being. Integration with architect technology that will expand your consciousness, enhance your cognitive abilities, and give you access to information and tools beyond your current understanding. But you'll retain your essential nature, your species perspective, your individual personality. And the risks? Sarah was quiet for a moment. The procedure could kill you. Even if it succeeds, you'll never be able to return to a normal life among your people. You'll carry burdens that will isolate you from everyone you've ever known, and you'll be responsible for making decisions that affect trillions of lives. In other words, the Zephyrian said with surprising steadiness, we would sacrifice our individual lives to become guardians of everyone else's. That's one way to put it. The Vorthan's structure pulsed with thoughtful light patterns. And if we refuse, then I'll find others. The galaxy is full of beings with the potential for this kind of responsibility. It might take longer. The transition might be more dangerous, but the system we're building doesn't depend on any specific individuals. Krill watched the proceedings with fascination. In 50,000 years of architect history, no one had ever tried to recruit candidates through honest explanation and voluntary consent. The traditional approach had been to identify suitable individuals and then gradually manipulate them into positions where enhancement became necessary for survival. I have a question, the Cathari said. If this new system is truly democratic, who makes the final decisions when consensus cannot be reached? That's actually the most important part, Sarah explained. In true emergency situations, any enhanced individual can take unilateral action. But afterwards, they have to justify their decisions to the full council. If the group decides their actions were unjustified, they face consequences up to and including removal from the system. Accountability, the Aquarian observed. Something the original architects never had. Exactly. Power without accountability corrupts, even when wielded by beings with the best intentions. Our system is designed to prevent that by making sure no one ever has to carry the full burden alone. The candidates spent another hour discussing the proposal, asking detailed questions about the enhancement process, the governance structure, and the specific threats they would be facing. Sarah answered everything honestly, holding nothing back about the dangers and difficulties ahead. Finally, the Cathari spoke for the group. We need time to consider this decision. Of course, but understand that time is a luxury we don't have much of. Every day we delay increases the risk of something catastrophic happening, while the old system continues to fail. How long do we have to decide? Asked the Zephyrian. Krill answered this time. The current architect systems will maintain minimal functionality for approximately 6 more months. After that, we can only guarantee basic threat monitoring for perhaps another year. And if major crises emerge during that period? We handle them the old way, Sarah said grimly, which means potential genocide, system-wide manipulation, and all the other heavy-handed tactics that drove the original architects to the brink of extinction. The weight of the decision settled over the group like a physical presence. Through her enhanced perception, Sarah could see each candidate wrestling with the choice between personal safety and galactic responsibility. "I'll go first," the Aquarian announced suddenly. "My people have always believed that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. If this procedure can help protect trillions of lives, then the risk to one individual is acceptable." The Vorthon structure brightened with what Sarah recognized as resolve. "I also volunteer. My species has spent centuries studying the mathematics of probability and consequence. The statistical benefit of this system vastly outweighs the personal costs." One by one, the other candidates made their decisions. Some chose enhancement and responsibility. Others chose to return to their normal lives. Sarah respected both choices equally. The galaxy needed both guardians and citizens, and not everyone was suited for the burdens they were proposing to take on. In the end, 5 of the 12 candidates volunteered for the enhancement process. It was more than Sarah had dared hope for, and enough to begin building the foundation of their new system. "When do we start?" asked the Cathari, who had been the last to decide but whose commitment seemed absolute once made. Sarah looked to Krill, who was already preparing the enhancement chambers. "Right now. We have a galaxy to save and very little time to figure out how to do it." As the volunteers prepared for their transformations, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and terror that her enhanced empathy allowed her to experience with crystal clarity. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before, democratizing the power of gods while maintaining the ability to act when democracy moved too slowly. If they succeeded, galactic civilization might finally achieve true stability and growth. If they failed, everyone they were trying to protect would pay the price. But as she watched her fellow volunteers step forward to accept enhancement and responsibility, Sarah felt confident in one thing: they would not fail for lack of trying. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. Now it was time to see if that strength could scale up to galactic proportions. 3 years. After the first enhancement procedures, Sarah stood in the command center of the newly constructed Galactic Oversight Station, watching as her enhanced team coordinated their response to the latest crisis. The station orbited a neutron star at the galaxy's edge, its exotic matter construction allowing it to exist in a region of space-time that made conventional detection impossible. The Aquarian, now calling herself Flow of Currents, moved through the holographic displays with fluid grace, her enhanced consciousness processing probability matrices that tracked 17 different developing situations across the galaxy. The Vorthon Crystal Song of Truth resonated at frequencies that allowed her to interface directly with quantum communication networks spanning thousands of light years. "Status report," Sarah requested, her enhanced awareness already processing the data streams but wanting to hear her team's analysis. "The hegemony crisis is escalating," reported the Cathari, whose enhanced name translated roughly to "Stoneheart burning with compassion." "They've developed antimatter weapons capable of cracking planets, and their leadership shows classic signs of expansionist psychosis." Through the quantum communication network, Sarah could observe the hegemony's military preparations in real time. Their battle fleets were massing near the borders of 3 different species' territories, and intelligence reports suggested they were planning simultaneous invasions. "Options?" Sarah asked. Flow of Currents manipulated the probability displays, showing different intervention scenarios. Direct military intervention would stop them immediately, but would require revealing our existence to the general galactic population. Economic manipulation could slow their expansion, but might not prevent the initial attacks. Diplomatic intervention through the Council would take too long. "What about the new approach?" suggested Crystal Song of Truth. Sarah smiled. The new approach was something they had been developing over the past year. Instead of manipulating events from the shadows, they had begun creating what they called catalyst situations that encouraged species to make better decisions on their own. "Run the simulation," Sarah ordered. The holographic displays shifted to show a complex scenario that would unfold over the next several months. Instead of stopping the hegemony directly, They would arrange for their intelligence services to discover evidence of an external threat, one of the many real dangers the architects had been monitoring for millennia. The crystalline hive has been dormant for 800 years, Stoneheart explained, highlighting a region of space near hegemony territory. But our sensors show they're beginning to show signs of awakening. If we, accidentally, let the hegemony discover this threat, their military focus would shift from expansion to defense. And the hive itself? Still several decades away from full awakening. Plenty of time to address that threat through diplomatic channels with the species in that region. Sarah studied the projections carefully. The plan would work, but it represented a fundamental shift in approach that still made her uncomfortable. They were still manipulating events, just more subtly and with better long-term outcomes. Counter-proposals? She asked. The newest member of their team, a human named Marcus Wong who had undergone enhancement 6 months ago, raised his hand. What if we just told them? The room fell silent. Through her enhanced empathy, Sarah could sense the mixture of surprise and consideration coming from her teammates. Explain, Sarah prompted. Marcus activated his own set of displays, showing political analysis of hegemony leadership. Their expansionist policies are driven by resource scarcity and population pressure. But they're also driven by fear. They believe they have to expand or die because they don't see any other options. So we show them other options. We reveal the existence of the Oversight Council. Not the old architect system, but our new one. We offer them membership in exchange for peaceful behavior. We help them solve their resource problems through trade and technology sharing instead of conquest. Stoneheart's emotional patterns showed deep skepticism. That approach violates every principle of operational security. If the hegemony learns of our existence, every other species will demand the same transparency. Exactly, Marcus said with a grin that reminded Sarah why she had recruited him. We make transparency the default instead of the exception. Sarah considered the proposal through her enhanced analytical capabilities. The risks were enormous. Exposing the Oversight Council would fundamentally change the nature of galactic politics. But the potential benefits were equally significant. Crystal Song, run a full projection analysis. All scenarios, maximum detail. The Vorthan's structure brightened as she processed the request. Her enhanced consciousness could run simulations that took into account millions of variables across thousands of different timelines. After several minutes, she spoke. The transparency approach shows a 67% probability of success in preventing the hegemony crisis. But it also shows a 43% probability of triggering system-wide political chaos as other species demand council representation. And the long-term projections? If successful, the transparency approach leads to a stable galactic government within 50 years, with minimal need for architect-level intervention. If unsuccessful, it leads to the collapse of the current political structure and potential system-wide war. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her enhanced consciousness. This was exactly the kind of choice that had driven the original architects to burnout, the need to make decisions that affected the fate of entire civilizations based on incomplete information and probability projections. But unlike the original architects, she wasn't making this decision alone. Team vote, she announced. Full transparency with the hegemony, with the understanding that this likely means revealing ourselves to the entire galactic community. All in favor? Marcus immediately raised his hand. After a moment's consideration, Crystal Song of Truth's structure pulsed with agreement. Stoneheart was quiet for several seconds before nodding his consent. Flow of currents was the last to decide. The probabilities are concerning, she said finally. But the potential for genuine progress outweighs the risks. I vote yes, motion carries, Sarah announced. We make contact with the hegemony leadership within 48 hours. As the team began planning their first official contact with the galactic government, Sarah reflected on how far they had come from the original architect model. Instead of omniscient guardians making unilateral decisions, they had become facilitators, beings with enhanced capabilities who helped others find solutions to their own problems. It wasn't perfect. There were still situations that required direct intervention, still threats that had to be handled through force or manipulation. But increasingly, they were finding ways to solve problems through cooperation rather than control. Sarah, called Krill from his monitoring station, the last surviving original architect, had chosen to remain as an advisor, rather than undergo the modifications that would have allowed him to integrate fully with the new system. Yes, I have been observing your team's decision-making process, and I want you to know, what you are attempting would have been impossible for my people. We were too focused on efficiency, too afraid of chaos, too convinced that we knew better than everyone else. Sarah joined him at his station, looking out at the swirling energies of the neutron star that powered their facility. Are you saying we're making the right choice?
I am saying you are making a choice that my people were never brave enough to make.
Whether it is right or wrong, we will discover together. 2 days later, Sarah found herself standing in the main council chamber of the hegemony capital world, looking across a conference table at leaders who had been planning interstellar war just hours before. Their faces showed the same mixture of shock, fear, and desperate hope that she had seen in the original Fear Protocol. Candidates, you claim to represent a hidden government that has been manipulating galactic politics for millennia, said the hegemony's prime minister, a stern woman whose enhanced emotional patterns showed she was struggling to process the revelations. Why should we believe you? Sarah activated a holographic display that showed real-time monitoring data from across hegemony space. Military communications, resource allocation, population centers, everything that demonstrated the scope of their surveillance capabilities. Because we've been watching you prepare for war and we're here to offer you something better. Over the next several hours, Sarah and her team outlined their proposal. Instead of conquest, the hegemony could join the Oversight Council as a founding member of the new galactic government. Instead of fighting over resources, they could access architect technologies that would solve their scarcity problems. Instead of expansion through force, they could grow through cooperation and trade. And in exchange? Asked the Prime Minister. You help us build a system where conflicts are resolved through negotiation instead of violence. You share your military expertise to help protect the galaxy from external threats, and you accept that some decisions affecting galactic security may need to be made by enhanced individuals acting in emergency situations. The negotiations took 3 days. Sarah watched the hegemony leadership work through the same psychological journey that she and her team had experienced, the gradual recognition that their individual perspectives were just small pieces of a much larger picture. In the end, they agreed. 6 months later, Sarah stood before the first official session of the Galactic Oversight Council. Representatives from 47 species filled the amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of languages and perspectives that her enhanced consciousness could follow simultaneously. The age of hidden guardians is ending, she announced to the assembly. The age of cooperative governance is beginning. Together, we will face the challenges that no single species could handle alone. Together, we will build a civilization that can last for millions of years. As applause erupted from dozens of different species using dozens of different methods of showing approval, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since her enhancement. Simple, uncomplicated pride in a job well done. They had taken the impossible burden of galactic guardianship and transformed it into something sustainable, not by making individuals stronger, but by making the whole system better. The galaxy still faced threats that would challenge their new cooperative approach. There were still species that would choose conquest over cooperation, still dangers that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. But for the first time in 50,000 years, those challenges would be faced by a united galactic community, rather than by exhausted guardians operating in secret. Sarah looked out at the assembled representatives and smiled. They had a lot of work ahead of them, but she was confident they would succeed. After all, they were no longer afraid of the dark.